What's the saddest death that you've ever encountered while playing D&D? Part 3. In an old 3.5 campaign, I was playing a child sorcerer named Piff. He was already a sad character because his town booted him out under the guise of, "Now go, adventure and hone your skills." He believed it. He was a very young child. So, here was this little kid who was so proud to be out adventuring with a party and getting better at all his spell casting, even though his party was basically full of chaotic, stupid dickbags, and his family didn't want him back. The party went into this cursed cave, where the party happened upon a Balrog. The group fought valiantly, but the Balrog exploded, and Piff, being an 8-year-old sorcerer, was not the beefiest. Piff was obliterated in the explosion. Not just dead, there was nothing left of him. This cave, as I mentioned, was cursed. Anyone who died there could not be resurrected. Their souls were trapped. So, for the rest of time, Piff's soul would wander out in search of his hometown to tell his parents of his adventures. But he couldn't remember his way home, and even if he could only venture so far without being pulled back into the cave and having to start again. That was how Piff would spend his afterlife. Kingmaker. I was a player, and this has a minor spoiler included. We were allowed to plan out our cohort for eventual 7th level feat taking, and encouraged to work with the GM to make them a part of your character background, to show up naturally in the campaign. The cohort was also allowed to be a monster, within certain limits, so I chose a unicorn. I had this elaborate backstory, an elf that ran away from his home at the young age of 90, and a pair of unicorns protected me for a few months in the wild forests of the River Kingdoms. I would visit them from time to time, after I went back home. Unicorns mate for life, according to the bestiary. There was a part in the campaign where a unicorn turns up dead in a super nasty magic ritual, and the male of the couple was the victim. The female cried over his non-rotting corpse. She was nearly dead herself because she wouldn't leave his side until we found the scene, and I convinced her to go home safely and recover. We were 5th level, maybe 4th, and it was a complete shock to me. I cried, and made the rest of the group cry. Later in the campaign, the GM said it was the perfect setup, because why would a unicorn with a spouse trapeze around with a group of adventurers unless there was a tragedy? I still bring it up, perhaps a little bitterly, to the GM. At least I don't kill unicorns. In one of my campaigns, some really strange things happened. That player remained in play, and pledged himself to a lawful good deity that presented herself to them, seeking to save himself and his friends from his evil urges. Unfortunately, the gods themselves were threatened by an entity of even greater power, and they were forced to seal off their realm, so as to consolidate their power for the coming battle. That also meant that the player in question was cut off from his patron deity's guidance. Slowly but surely, he began to lose control of himself. He could sense that soon he would have no control over himself. After a particularly bad outburst where he nearly killed another party member, he said, "Forgive me," and left the party. Then he went out into the wastes, searching for the demonic citadel. Despite looking like a demon, he was not one, and the actual demons knew. He fought hard, slew dozens of demons, and then he fell. The rest of the party never saw him again. Soon thereafter, they disbanded, abandoning the world to its fate. My main character in my first campaign ever had an intelligent short sword from day one. This was a 2nd edition campaign. My main was a ranger, so in those days, tons of move silently and hide in shadows. His sword gave him a boost to both, as well as a +1. Had it forever. Like from level 1 maybe to 6 or 7. One day, the sword gets broken during a massive fight. Out pops a dude, another ranger, who had been trapped in the sword for forever. So, Ranger dude from the sword comes to the party. Many adventures ensue, and the dude and my ranger get super close. Then, one day, exploring the plains, we get super ambushed. Tons of rocks and they crit like crazy. We had a house rule. Roll a percentile while praying to your god and get a 1, and the god answers. Obviously, God answered. FR, Maliki. God stops time and demands a sacrifice. After a lot of looks, I step forward. Dude shoves me out of the way, sacrifices himself instead. Massive feels. Had a funeral and everything. I still have his character sheet. He got to have one even though he was an NPC. Second edition was simpler times. Visor Tever, a dragonborn NPC, was living in the fair town of Arendelle with his loving wife Evandra and his 2 children, Temeron, female, and Elendrai, male. He was once a terrorist working for the Viper clan to inspire fear and political change without harming anyone, until an explosion he set off burned a nearby orphanage down, condemning 12 children to a painful, burning doom. With his act cleaned up and his life brighter than ever, the party visits Visor in his home and speaks to him about a member of the Viper clan when an assassin attacks, blowing up Visor's home and killing Evandra instantly. Traumatized, the party helps Visor and his family escape before meeting him again at his secret cabin away from civilization. Out of the kindness of his heart, and despite losing his wife, Visor invites the party to stay and sleep instead of paying for a cabin, only for the assassin to plant another explosive in one of the party members' backpacks, and after multiple failed circumstance/checks, the bomb explodes in Visor's home. I can still remember the faces of my players when I described the black, seared skeleton of Visor's summer retreat, flames still burning and abound before he slowly turns, tears streaking down his face as he held the charred, broken body of Temeron, his daughter. My players met a paladin named Hrothgar. In the beginning, he was the head of the resistance against the god of tyranny, Bane. The players had inadvertently caused Bane's resurrection earlier, and Hrothgar led a good fight with the free people of Faerun to hold his forces back. Hrothgar was everything a good paladin should be: strong, kind, brave, generous, quick to laugh, a master strategist, a fair and just leader, and a man worth following. In the epic 3-day battle against Bane's army, Hrothgar went missing. It was assumed he died, and many men mourned his passing after the successful defeat of Bane. However, as the party continued their adventures deep into the Under Mountain, where the last remnant of Bane's spark existed, they found a naked and battered Hrothgar taken capture. The party freed him and he thanked them profusely, glad to find hope and friends where he had despaired he would die alone. He eagerly joined them in their quest to destroy the final spark of Bane. As these things so often are, the spark was guarded by a lesser agent of evil, who took it upon himself to accept it and begin his transition into a god, as the party fought him. Hrothgar earned his stripes, but betrayal then struck the party. It was revealed as the agent fell that this entire series of events was orchestrated by an evil influence within the party rogue, the god of lies and murder, Cyric himself. Cyric took over the rogue's body and accepted Bane's spark as his own, quickly doubling his power. He turned to the party and they found themselves unable to resist his dark power, and they fell to their knees. The party paladin, a man to be good friends with Hrothgar, was in a particularly weakened state from a previous event that left him easy prey to Cyric's suggestions. As the dark god gloated and gave his speech on how he won, he controlled the paladin and made him walk to his dear friend Hrothgar and slit his throat. The player's shocked gasp to this day made me proud as a storyteller. The story did not end there, but that's outside the scope of this question. One of my groups that I DM kidnaps goblins and beat the goblin until it answers to the name Lucky, and decides to help the player. The first time this happened, it was a way to get information from an enemy without rousing suspicion. A huge trade-off, as if it went wrong, the party would be fighting a whole stronghold of goblins at level 2. The first Lucky became great friends with the players, so much that the wizard was constantly casting illusions on the goblin to make him look less like a goblin and more like an adventurer. Lucky forgave the party for beating him, but since then, he had been treated very nicely, protected, fed, clothed, and given a warm bed each night. One of the characters actually took an arrow for Lucky. The character lost his eye because of this arrow. The party, Lucky included, were tasked with rescuing a city that had gone quiet. This city used to be a bustling trade capital. The gates and since have been locked and nobody had entered or exited since. Along the way to the city, the party encountered a hunting part of hobgoblins, with wolves in tow. A nat 20 roll had the hobgoblins see through the illusion spell and see Lucky for what he was, a goblin. They all attacked him, tearing him to shreds. The party was unable to kill the hobgoblins quick enough. The last wolf dragged Lucky's lifeless body 20 feet away as the fighter, who had lost an eye, -2 range to hit rolls, loosed an arrow and hit the wolf at the base of its skull. The party gathered the remains of Lucky, checked the area for any scraps of what were left of him, and carried his corpse to the nearest safe town with a cleric. They scrambled to empty their pockets, hoping to have enough to resurrect the dead goblin, but fell short by 200 gold. They were told they had only 6 hours before the soul is unable to return to the body. They went around asking for odd jobs. The fighter and rogue took out a band of orcs roaming the outskirts of town, while the wizard spent 5 hours devising a means to purify a water source. The ranger hunted for food and game to sell to the town, and after 5 hours, all party members returned to the cleric with every coin they had earned, falling short still by 50 gold. The fighter offered up his sword of silver, a family heirloom. This was enough. With less than an hour remaining, the cleric came hastily to prepare for the spell to bring back the dead goblin. His hands glowed, the ceiling seemed to radiate with heavenly light. The goblin corpse stitched itself together, fingers attaching to hands, hands to arms, arms to torso. His corpse floated above the table, rebuilt by heavenly magic, light blazing from his eyes, his mouth, his ears and nose. Life was returning to his body. His finger twitched, his hand curled, his arm raised up, pointing to the ceiling. And a moment later, his lips pursed together, and as they opened, a breath escaped the following sound. Why? At once the room went dark. His body dropped. It started to rot and decay, quickly turning from flesh to muscle to bone to dust. The room went dark and the party stood in shock. Sunlight rushed through the windows, lighting the room. The fighter looked upon the pile of dust, the last of Lucky. He grabbed an urn from the church and scooped the dust into it. He drew his sword and impaled the cleric and walked out. The wizard burned down the church, and the ranger left the party, never to return.